Good morning. My name is Derek Burridge, Chief Mission Integration Officer for Ascension, Texas. Thank you for joining us today for Leadership's Austin's Engaged series entitled What's Next for Austin's Creative Scene. Ascension, Texas provides care at 14 hospitals and numerous clinics across Central Texas. One of our values is creativity, or as we also like to call it, courageous innovation, which helps us provide high quality and cutting edge care for our patients. We understand that creatives come in all shapes and sizes. At Ascension, Texas, our doctors, nurses, administrators, techs, volunteers, and many more are playing a role in creative solutions for high quality care at our hospitals. We are so grateful for all of the work that they do. On behalf of Ascension, Texas, we look forward to this conversation and learnings from the creatives in our growing city, Austin. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Sonta Henderson. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, thank you for joining us for today's ATX Together Engage series. Our topic today, what's next for Austin's creative scene? As affordability drives more people to Austin and out of Austin and things that are affecting the arts and culture in our city, we wanted to sit down with experts to talk about some of the issues affecting it. For example, social issues, business, and rapid growth intersecting with Austin's creative sector. Our panelists today include Theresa Alvarez. She is the president and CEO of Austin Economic Development Corporation. Jonathan Chaka Mahone, founder and director of DAWA, and Annie Burridge, the general director and CEO at Austin Opera. Thanks to each of you for joining us today. I know you have a wealth of experience and knowledge about this subject matter. We're so glad to have you here to share with our audience. So let's begin with each of you by sharing your backgrounds, and I'll start with Theresa.
Thank you, Sonta, for having me. I'm Theresa Alvarez, CEO and president of the Austin Economic Development Corporation. We are a newly formed nonprofit and local government corporation created by the city of Austin, city council members along with city staff, to address exactly what Sonta just said about the affordability issues that we're facing in Austin. So I'll introduce myself first as an artist. My background is in dance. I grew up doing musical theater and dance probably the first 30 years of my life. During that time, received a finance degree from the University of Texas, went into banking, both Chase Bank, Texas Commerce Bank, helped start the first community development financial institution in Austin, which is today called People Fund. And then I spent the past 20 years at Wells Fargo Foundation investing in economic development and affordable housing before applying for this job. So again, our organization is 2 years old, and very excited about this opportunity to connect back to my background as an artist, but also work with the artistic community that I grew up working with as well.
Thank you, Theresa. Chaka?
What's going on, Austin? It's Chaka. I'm the founder and director of DAWA. And Swahili, DAWA means medicine. An acronym for DAWA is Diversity, Awareness, and Wellness in Action. I've been in Austin for 13 years and experienced the struggles and ups and downs of establishing yourself as an artist as a full-time career. And I started DAWA in 2019 as a result of my experiences here. The reason that we were able to reach a level of sustainability as artists was because we had a community. There are a lot of artists and creatives out here and other folks that don't have community or don't have that access to people that get support. And so they struggle and oftentimes deal with mental health crises and other type of crises that emerge from financial crises. So since 2019, DAWA has distributed $153,000 to what we call the community frontliners. That's the teachers, the artists, the social workers, the healthcare providers, the service industry workers. We're getting ready to launch our application in May 15. We're giving away another $90,000 to that very community. We had an event during South by Southwest called Vision 8291, which is about reversing the trauma, the financial social and spiritual trauma of the 1928 city master plan. And we raised almost $20,000 for 6 BIPOC-led grassroots organizations. So we're really about, putting our money where our mouth is. We talk about equity, and a lot of people, it's become catchphrases and catchwords, but we need investment. The same way we invest in companies, tech companies and other things, we need to invest in the communities and people that make Austin what it is. And we believe those people are the community frontliners, the folks that are daily, day in and day out, making sure that we're okay, making sure that we're nurtured, making sure that we're receiving medicine and healing through all their great roles that they play.
Okay, excellent, Chaka. Thank you so much. And for those of you listening, you heard him say May 15th for one of those initiative deadlines that he's working with DAWA. Next, we'll have Annie.
Hi, I'm Annie Burridge. I arrived in Austin about 6.5 years ago to take the position of General Director and CEO at Austin Opera. I had been with Opera Philadelphia for 9 years before coming here. My whole career has been in opera. I have a couple degrees in opera, a couple degrees in business. And so I've been working in opera my whole adult life. And I was so intrigued about the opportunity here in Austin. I just saw so much potential for the company to grow by partnering with this incredible diverse community we have here, really embracing the spirit of Austin more in all of our programming. So over the past few years, we've won 4 national innovation grants for our programming initiatives. And we've established some really key partnerships that have certainly dictated really the strategic direction of the company, with places like the Mexican consulate, with Austin PBS. We just finished a huge opera in collaboration with Austin Dance India. And we're just excited about the possibilities of just working with our partners in the community here in Austin.
Thank you, Annie, so much. And as I said, I'm glad to have each of you here. I'll start this conversation with some basic insight about arts and culture in Austin, and then we'll move into some of the more prevailing issues that affect that community. So this first question is for each of you, and it is, what is the single biggest need our community needs to understand about our local creative scene? And I'll start with Theresa.
What is our biggest need?
That people need to understand about the creative scene in Austin?
Well, from my perspective, so if you remember in 2018, the voters approved $12 million in bond funds to invest into the creative community. And so I'll speak from my perspective over the past year of leading this process. What we identified in 45 applications, we identified the need of over $300 million of investments needed in real estate, just to retain the cultural arts community with the rising property taxes, leases going up. We've seen, and that's, keep in mind, we started this process last year. We had 45 applications in a very short period of time. We know that you can't reach everybody. We know that the artistic community is much bigger than 45 organizations. And so the way that I would answer that question is the need is financial. And we identified, again, $300 million in need. So that is what comes first to mind for me.
Thank you, Theresa. Chaka?
I think what anybody watching or listening needs to know is that this city was largely built on the creative, advertising itself as a place for creatives, and we pretty much got used to build this city and develop it and make it what it is. But there's been very little investment, along with what Theresa is saying. There's been very little investment in infrastructure, very little investment in programs that actually directly benefit artists and creatives. Venues during COVID, venues got billions of dollars in bailouts. Artists got very little, if anything. We've had to fight tooth and nail to get whatever we can get, and we're still not respected. We're still not seen on the same level as a venue or as a company and things like that, even though we're small businesses that make this city at what it is. And we were put on the brochures, we were put on the front page of things so that people could be brought in as tourists and things could be developed, but we were not invested in. And so there needs to be, urgent investment in the creative community. And we need to act as if we're in a crisis. Not that COVID wasn't a crisis, but there's been a social pandemic known as racism that's existed in this city for generations. This is the most economically segregated, one of the most economically segregated cities in the country. Okay, so we're dealing with a serious crisis that needs urgent response.
Thank you, Annie.
Yeah, I would concur. Money's the big issue, and the art scene here in Austin is really underfunded when you compare it to other cities of a similar size. And if you look at organizations that employ, 200 artists a year, organizations like mine, and that make it possible for a lot of artists to make a living here in Austin through organizations that provide regular work and employment. But if you look at where our funding is coming from, for example, the year I left Philadelphia to come here, that year we had in Philadelphia $5 million of annual foundation funding. Moving here to Austin, there was $10,000 of foundation funding. And the only way we've been able to move that needle is if we win something out of a national pool. And so the arts organizations here in Austin are about half to 1/3 of the size you would see in other similar sized cities, because there's no institutional support in comparison to cities that have had foundations that have been around for a couple hundred years, or kind of different levels of expectation in terms of corporate philanthropy. And all of that carries over to the amount of art we can do and the number of artists we can employ.
Thank you so much. So you guys have touched on this next question a little bit. You've talked about companies and, agencies in the city, but now we'll try to drill down more into the artist himself or herself.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard the term starving artist, and, we know what that means is, creatives can spend a lot of time giving of their art and their talents, but often they're not compensated for the creativity. So when we talk about the starving artist, if each of you could kind of give an example maybe, or some personal insight you might have about this type of thing. And the question is, what are some of the main challenges for Central Texas creatives this year in 2023? Chaka?
So one of the things that we created through DAWA is something called DAWA Studios. And so it's a content studio where people of color can come in and create content for free. One of the barriers that a lot of creatives face is the amount of technology and equipment you need to create content. A lot of folks that are in the arts community, that are leaders in the arts community, think it's about shows and think it's about that. No, that has shifted over the last 5 years. A lot of things are online, and artists have to be very, very savvy with how they market themselves and how they brand themselves and how they use online content to reach audiences either locally and or nationally. So we created DAWA Studios for artists to be able to take that barrier away. They can come in. They can leave the studio after an hour with a edited video. We have live video switching, and they can upload those videos right to their Facebook, anything that they're using. And this is a way to just help folks with the content that they need to create and help them reach their audiences. The starving artist trope is like if people take that as a badge of honor, I think artists should really be some of the most valued members of our society. It's a shame that they don't become valued until they become famous, and we just expect them to just take all the blows and all the ignoring of their work and all the challenges that they face until they become big, and then the world wants to receive them. I think Austin specifically has a responsibility because of the way it marketed itself, the way that it called out to artists that, we're a place for you. And then you get here and you realize some of the things and gaps that are missing, which is exactly why that I created DAWA, because the majority of these nonprofits, almost to a T, ignored the things that I was bringing to them as artists and the struggles that we're having as people of color in this city, as creatives of color in this city. So I had to create an entire organization to address the needs, because these organizations were not listening and were not hearing what I was talking about. And that's, again, like, the artist needs to be brought to the table and taken seriously as a leader. A lot of times when you talk about city issues, the creative community is not in there at all. You got the economist, you got this person, you got that person. But someone like me who started an organization that's distributed, it's going to, after May, is going to be $250,000 to the folks of color in this city, needs to be at the table, needs to be taken seriously. And that's the thing, is that we are not taken seriously as businesses, as leaders. And so that is a cultural shift that needs to happen. And that's a leadership shift. That's a mind state shift that needs to happen in all of these rooms across the board in Austin.
Thank you so much, Chaka. Just a quick follow-up for you. You talked about having the studios open where people can come in and create content. I'm sure some of the audience will definitely was interested in that. What are the hours of operation? How does it work?
Right now, based on our capacity, it's about 4 to 5 hours per day during the week that's available. We have a part-time studio manager, and folks can find out more about that at dawahills.org, and they can just Google DAWA Studios or go on IG at DAWA Hills, DAWAHEALS. And again, that's any BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color in Austin that has creative ideas, and also BIPOC-led organizations. Is free of charge to use.
Thank you so much. Theresa, I'll move to you with the same question. What are some of the challenges that creatives are facing specifically in 2023?
Yeah, well, I'll start with my own experience as a starving artist, and it's my answer today is housing, but it was an issue when I was a starving artist. Dancers, I agree with Chaka. Haven't done all kinds of art, but the art that form that I'm familiar with, or my background in dance, is very much undervalued, not paid. I was living with, I think we had like 4 people in a house. The dancers all had full-time jobs or multiple jobs. And then we rehearsed every evening from 6 to 9, and then did shows on the weekends. And so it's definitely undervalued, but we had a housing issue. This was back in the 90s. So to answer your question, Sonta, for 2023, it's just quadrupled, right? The problem is even bigger. And most of my artist friends have had to move out of Austin. If they didn't own their house in Austin that they bought in the 90s or 2000s, so many of them have moved to Maynard, Del Valle, Kyle, Buda, Lockhart, all directions. Well, I shouldn't say all directions, the affordable directions of the city, I should say, and that's, the Austin Economic Development Corporation. We're not solely focused. The Cultural Trust is one of our projects, but we're also doing real estate development. And we have on our board representatives from the Real Estate Council, Urban Land Institute, the Chambers, the Arts Commission, the Music Commission, city employees. But I just want to give a little bit of credit to City Council creating the right group of leaders to have a seat at the table to really influence development in Austin, to make sure that new development includes space for creative, whether that's rehearsal space, whether that's venue space, and live workspace for artists as well. So every developer that we're talking to or looking at city-owned land that's being, we're looking at right now city-owned land, but it could be any publicly owned land. It could be from Travis County or AISD. How do we incorporate arts into every project? Because to Chaka's point, this is the creative backbone. Arts is the economic development of Austin and what has built this city. So how do we incorporate that into everything we're doing economic development wise?
Thank you, Theresa. And we'll definitely talk about some of the things you mentioned in terms of affordability and housing as we move along in the show. Annie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said. When we do an opera, that will involve typically 200 artists, if you're counting, technical crew and stage artists. And maybe 5 or 6 of them will bring in from outside the area because they're, a specialist in a certain type of voice type. But all the rest are local Austin talent. And the affordability issues in town have really made it difficult, on top of a pandemic, which really decimated a lot of our local talent. We lost a lot of talent, either changing careers, moving out of the city, or even to more heartbreaking circumstances during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. The hill to climb to making a life through all of this has only become harder. And we pay competitively, we pay good wages, but with the sector being underfunded overall, we can't produce enough work for that to stretch around the entire year for folks.
Thank you, Annie. Now, of course, when we talk about arts and entertainment, funding is always a hot topic. According to the Austin Monitor report in February, the city is seeing an increase in the hot tax. Now, that's the hotel tax that helps the city fund its arts and culture. Last year, the city worked to revise its process for cultural arts. And apparently there's a vote coming up about some of this month with the city council. So we wanted to ask each of you, can you share what is on the horizon for funding for local arts and how we're making headway in this arena? What are you hearing, Theresa?
Well, for me, when the Cultural Trust was moved to the Austin Economic Development Corporation, there were 2.5 million of hot dollars identified to supplement the 12 million that I talked about that the voters approved in bond funding. So this is my first experience working with hot dollars. I am excited to hear that those numbers are going up, and I just feel strongly that we get them invested in the right places so that it does benefit the end artist, right? So we want to, so what I'm trying to do for the Austin Economic Development Corporation is invest those hot dollars via the Cultural Trust, the same process that I've been talking about. Because as I mentioned, $300 million in needs for 45 organizations, $12 million is not going to get you very, very far in that. So I don't know the total numbers of what the hot dollars are. I just know about the 2.5 million that I have access, which also is not enough.
And Chaka, based on what Theresa just said for us, when we talk about equity, how do we ensure equity in this process? Any ideas you may have?
I think, again, it needs to be a culture shift. It needs to be more people recognizing the gaps and having people in the room that may not agree with them and may not have the same perspective or experience. I think one of the challenges, I was a music chair, the chair of the Music Commission in 2021 for an entire year. And I had to fight tooth and nail to get the Live Music Fund for the first time ever for that money to be allotted directly to musicians and not to venues or other people. And the next year, the following year, it will go to venues. But we had to fight, even though the venues have received funding, federal funding and things like that. I think, even in the conversation for the Live Music Fund, when in June of 2020, I had to just halt everything because, even listening to Annie, I understand that, the opera, some of these traditional venues are having trouble. But if these venues that have historically received funding and received opportunities and are privileged in a certain sense are having trouble, why haven't we been having this conversation when the Black venues were closing down and things like that? There's a systemic racial bias in all of these rooms that needs to be addressed, and the people that are impacted by that need to be not just at the table. They need to be listened to, and they need to be taken seriously with solution oriented decisions. So that's I think a big challenge that I personally have faced throughout the 13 years here in this city, is that people talk equity, they don't act equity, and they need to prioritize the needs and issues of folks that have been displaced and underrepresented for generations. If the Austin Opera is struggling, how do you think about like grassroots arts or dance organizations and things like that? So it's that challenge. But I have seen, on a positive note, I have seen the city respond through the arts funding changes where folks, communities of color are prioritized, historically underrepresented groups are prioritized. And I know some of these historical institutions have pushed back against that, but I encourage them to change that dialogue that they're having and push for more of that type of funding, because this is where the culture comes from. A lot of times it comes from these underrepresented communities. And if we're not here, guess what? The culture changes dramatically.
Thank you. And Annie, just as a reminder, we're talking about the allocation of hot funds and equity in the process. So is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything that has been said. And I know that the guidelines for how those hot funds have changed. And I think the priorities to what that money is actually supporting, they're bang on. They make a lot of sense. What I don't know is if there is a mechanism in place to ensure that money is going to support those priorities in an equitable way. But I hope that they are, because I think that the priorities themselves are certainly the right ones for the city.
Thanks each of you so much. So another article in the Austin Monitor talks about affordability, and we've hinted about this earlier in the conversation, but so want to talk about how is it that artists who provide so much, give so much to the community, as each of you have mentioned, can afford to live in the community side by side by the folks who enjoy their work. So the question is, how tough is it for these artists, and what are you guys hearing for artists who come to Austin to work, but as Theresa mentioned earlier, have to live in Lockhart, Bastrop, Buda, other places? I'll start with Theresa.
Well, so I have a long background in investing in affordable housing, and it's not just artists; it's everyone, right? Like any, homeless to working class to artists. I mean, there is a housing crisis in Austin, and there's a lot of organizations focused on making it better. Foundation communities. I chaired the board of foundation communities years ago. I think they're at least 30 years old, and I think if they hadn't started building affordable housing 30 years ago or longer, we wouldn't have any affordable housing in Austin. I know the City of Austin's housing department, the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, Affordable Central Texas, Habitat for Humanity. I mean, we're blessed to have so many organizations in Austin that have been focused on housing, but the fact that we're still in this housing crisis is scary, because where are we headed? And Houston-Tillotson University, the students used to be able to live all around campus, and that's no longer an option for students. There's not enough dorms on campus, so there's a student housing crisis, there's an artist crisis, there's a so, I mean, that's what I continually hear. And after having spent time investing in affordable housing, I don't know the end solution, but I do agree that we have to look at the systemic racism in the city of why we're so segregated still today in 2023, and ask ourselves what are we doing to change that, because it just seems like the problem just keeps getting worse, and we're becoming more segregated by if you look at who's being displaced in Austin, it is people of color.
Thank you. Chaka?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the time to, get involved in housing and know what's going on. I'm in the arts community, I'm in the music community. But my solution is DAWA, is getting people money. And it's not just creatives, it's healthcare providers. It's the people that are the nurses, that are in taking care of people when they're transitioning, when they're leaving, in hospice. It's the people that are working at the bars, and serving drinks and serving food. These are the people that we focus on, because they are having the most difficult time. And again, I can't state it enough, but there's not enough people like me, who is a contributor, is a major contributor to not just culture, but economic growth and things like that. There's not enough people like me in these rooms, and that's why you continue to have the systemic issues that we have, because the people that are experiencing this aren't heard. their ideas are not being implemented into what our future looks like. And so we have to be centered. There's no other way to do it. That's my opinion. That's a personal opinion. There's no other way to do it because the leadership that is in place has gotten us here.
Thank you so much. I'll move to Annie. What are you hearing from some of the people? I know you said you work with dozens of artists. What are you hearing from some of them about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the expertise of Theresa either in this area, other than it impacts every single aspect of my organization, even from administrators who are trying to recruit to work here, to our crew, our chorus, our musicians. It is just only getting harder. And again, coming out of COVID, which was the hardest thing that the creative community has ever faced in my lifetime. It's taking a toll on mental health, and it's going on just beyond general livability. There's the mental health crisis has been compounded in the creative community as well.
I just like to piggyback off that. I would just like to piggyback off of that, and what Annie's saying, like there was a social pandemic called racism that we've been facing for generations before COVID that had the same exact results that she's talking about, from access to jobs and things like that we were facing, that still needs to be addressed. It's like COVID like woke people up to, oh wow, but before COVID, we had similar impacts in our community that were not addressed at all. It's like COVID, everyone started to address these things, but I don't want to downplay what she said, but there has to be a point where we deal with the fact that racism and all these things are a social pandemic, a crisis that we've been in for generations, and that needs to be addressed the same way that we addressed COVID. We get federal money, everything. Now you have money. You have money for this now. Where was the money when we were being displaced? Where was the money when our businesses were going down? Nobody cared. So that's something that needs to be processed. We keep talking about COVID and the uncertainty, and these are uncertain times. It's been uncertain for a lot of us for a long time.
Yes, well, I think voices like yours in the community can certainly speak to that. And as you're here today, people will hear what you're saying. So, keep using that voice to open doors and to push for those changes as needed. So thank you so much, all of you, for adding that insight. So we're moving along to our next question here. We know the Texas Cultural Trust says that 11% of Austin employees are employed as creatives. We know what creatives give to our community. We enjoy the shows, we enjoy the museums, the concerts. So the next question is, why is there a disconnect between the economic benefit that artists, see versus the contributions that they give to art and culture in this area? And so I'll start with you, Annie.
I'm not sure that is a new phenomenon, or even a localized phenomenon. And perhaps we are getting better at addressing that in public discourse. But I think Chaka's totally right. I mean, it's voices like his that need to be given the emphasis and the weight in those conversations. But yeah, I don't think that is a local or new phenomenon that creates what they contribute to an economy or to a community or to a region are not valued appropriately.
Absolutely. So in terms of that question, we're speaking on, why is there that disconnect? Listening to you people talk about it, listening to your expertise, the people you work with, the community issues that we face. Why is it that we're still having this disconnect between what artists deserve, what their art means to the city? I think Chaka talked about, how Austin built itself and how so many people come to Austin, the live music capital of the world, for example. So Chaka, can you join in on that?
Absolutely. I think it's just a statement on the culture that we are immersed in, where it's about individualism. You talk about this Horatio Alger myth, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, who has bootstrap? Like how do you try to put it? Doesn't even make sense. Like, first of all, what's a bootstrap? What, how do you pull yourself up? It's just crazy. There's this idea that you kind of just, you're an individual and you got to make it, and if you make it, then we'll applaud. But there's so much that goes into becoming these artists that are so well known, and they are professionals, but it's not accepted until you reach a certain state. And I think that's because of the concept of production that we have. It's like, you're not valuable unless you're producing something tangible that can be either consumed in some way, either eaten or whatever, or just brought into a house, like materially. So the arts is something that's not as tangible for people to understand the value, but yet everybody has a favorite movie, everybody has a favorite song, everybody wears clothes. Those things are designed. Those are art. All these things that we appreciate. But if it's not packaged in some type of way, in a mode of production that is very highly valued, the people that make the widgets, the guys at Apple Computer and whatever. These are the folks that are given the biggest platforms. But where would we be without Dizzy Gillespie and Louis Armstrong and what they brought to the table? You can't even put a dollar sign on that. But yet, there's a lack of value of that, a monetary value for that. So I think it's just about capitalism and where capitalism puts its value. And so arts, like what Annie was saying, like this is a problem through time. And in Europe, they needed patrons, and they needed folks. It's like, where's the appreciation? And I think it's largely around just like where the value is placed, and it's placed in product, it's placed in what you can sell, like what you can exchange. And there's not always that direct correlation with art. Art is just something that's valuable in and of itself. We need songs to get us through the day. We need messages like that to help us understand ourselves better. And if somebody's doing it on a community level or on a Broadway level, it's still the same thing that we need. We still need stories. Our whole culture is based. We need stories. The stories we tell ourselves are important, which is why racism is such a powerful thing, because it's just a story about a group of people that's been told over and over again, so people start believing it, right? But artists have the power to shift those things through telling different stories and for helping us understand ourselves better. But that doesn't necessarily translate into dollar signs a lot of time.
Thank you so much. Theresa, anything you'd have to add?
Yeah, I'm going to add, from a philanthropy perspective, when people think about economic development, and I shouldn't say everybody thinks this, but I feel in corporate philanthropy, especially, which is my background, people tend to think of job creation, and they think about artists and artistic industry venues completely separate, and it needs to be a part of economic development. I do think that the city of Austin's economic development thinks of it that way, but that's not philanthropy, right? That's our tax dollars. So I think in corporate philanthropy, in individual philanthropy, it needs to be thought of differently, and not just, of course, I worked for a bank foundation that focused on affordable housing and economic development. And I felt like I always had to fight to make the case that supporting anything artistic is economic development. And there is a challenge with so many nonprofits in Austin, but I'm trying to figure out, how do we change that narrative? Like Chaka said, it is telling the story. And so how do we tell that story in a way to Austin's local philanthropic community? Because we do have, it's not the East Coast, as Annie mentioned. We don't have the philanthropy dollars in Austin that you have on the East Coast. That there's no question. We're nowhere close to that. But we don't even have the philanthropy that a Houston or Dallas has, right? So how do we change that narrative here in Austin? Where, Austin's always been known as a young community because of all the universities we have. So we have to start teaching, in the schools about philanthropy, and that includes arts. And then I think back to the pandemic of everybody posting, it was like, art is what helped people get through the pandemic. You saw, my community of bankers were mostly posting about music and arts and watching old shows and things like that. And so we know how important it is. So why do we not value it at the level of importance that it is to us every day?
Okay, so we'll move back again. We talked about the hot tax earlier, and we talked about equity. So now we'll talk about some diversity and inclusion in arts. And I know, Chaka, you've already touched on some of this in terms of how you feel about the different segments in our community and how they're treated in terms of funding and art. So I want to begin with you and kind of shift this question a bit. You've talked about having a seat at the table, when this decision making is made, when funds are being allocated. So what can you say? What do you say to other respective groups in terms of support, or even the decision makers in terms of why that extra voice at the table is valuable?
I would just say there's no real significant change without a voice that you don't agree with. You just cannot be comfortable. This is no time to be comfortable. We're in a crisis. You have to listen to people that are going through the crisis and experiencing the crisis, and then you also have to, like, take your blinders off and just look at things that are working. Something like DAWA is working. When I say we need to shift the narrative, we're not waiting for you to shift the narrative. We're shifting the narrative ourselves. We are saying these people are medicine. They are valuable. And we're not just saying it, we are giving them money and investing in them. We're not waiting for you to do it. So this type of perspective needs to permeate in every single space that exists. So when these conversations are happening, you have somebody in the room that thinks outside of the boxes that you have been programmed into. You think linearly, you think in a certain traditional format because that's how you've been educated, because that's what you're told is the way to go. And we need something completely different to disrupt what got us here. And so that is something that you have to look at yourself in the mirror and you have to acknowledge within yourself. If you're dealing with a friend that keeps repeating the same mistakes, right? You gotta smash the glass on the ground. You gotta do something, break something up to so they can hear you, so that something different can happen, because this way that we're moving in terms of leadership is a pattern, and like that pattern has to break, and the only way they can break is if different people are being placed in the room, but not just placed in the room, they are centered. But for me personally, like, I'm not waiting. We can't afford to wait as communities of color. We have to create our own institutions, and we have to create our own situations so that we are able to thrive as well. So I don't believe in like waiting for anyone to put me in the seat at the table, because that I'll be waiting. I'll be out of here in a lot of situations. So I believe in also just taking the initiative yourself, with those people of color. Like, what do you feel like is missing, and start taking those paths and inroads to make sure that your community has what it needs. But in general, like, to leadership, I say, you're too comfortable. You are too comfortable. You're in a situation of privilege. You're in a bubble. You can't address these situations without the most people that are most affected by them. The solutions that you're going to come up with are just too far removed, and not urgent enough, and not rapid enough. There's so many things that are missing. So you need to bring these people in. You need to be people that think differently than you. And you may have a conversation that may be, tense or whatever, but that's what change happens. You don't go in the gym and just lift light weights and expect for your body to change. You have to be challenged. And it's just a lack of that.
Thank you so much. Now, I know this may sound really simplistic, but you talked about change and embracing people differently than you. Sometimes people are afraid of change. So this next question is, how do we educate the community about embracing the differences in creativity? And I'll start with you, Annie.
Wow. I mean, I have nothing to add on to what Chaka had to say. I mean, that was perfect. In terms of addressing how that change needs to happen, from an organizational perspective, it's a lot easier when it's dealing with our personnel and who, I'm hiring as my peers in the organization. And there's no doubt that that diversity of opinion and those uncomfortable conversations as an organization make us a lot stronger. But in a nonprofit institution where you do have, when you have boards of directors, it's a different, it's a different proposition in bringing them along at the speed that is necessary. And so I really thank individuals like Chaka who said, like, we don't have time for you to get there. We're going to get there for you and start making the difference.
Thank you. Theresa, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll just share, not to be doom and gloom, but I'm scared for the future because we have this problem today of lack of diversity in boardrooms, on
Yeah.
commissions, you name it. There's a lack of diversity, and with people of color being pushed out, my concern is that problem is going to get worse and not better. I feel like it's always the same group of people on all the boards I've served. There, and every board has, I think, some awareness of it and conversations about wanting to diversify the board, having people at the table, and then it's also the same people because it's such a small community. So that I just wanted to add that I just fear of us going in the wrong direction as opposed to the right direction, which is more diversity. But if you look at where our city's headed, you're not going to be able to live here if you're not wealthy, because houses are, I used to know off the top of my head the housing cost, but even in central East Austin, which used to be able to buy a house for $50,000, houses are going for $2.5 million. And that was the lower income part of town. So anyway, that I have a lot of fears there for us.
No,
Yeah,
and
well, I
I
hope
think for me personally, though, that needs to like push what we push for a policy. If we feel that, then we have to wake up every day knowing that, and like just push for the furthest that we feel like we can push it. In all these spaces, because we are in that situation. We don't want to become a San Francisco or some of these other cities where only the privileged can live there. And if we know that's what's we're on the precipice of, then we have to go harder, and we have to be even stronger with the ideas that we have. And then we also have to listen to people with strong ideas and give them opportunities to push as well.
Thank you. Well, hopefully people listening and some of the decision makers can talk to people like you with all these ideas and try to help push some of these initiatives forth. So as we move along, we'll talk about something that we're not lacking, and that is venues for events, concerts, and activities. Large scale shows like ACL, and now we have the new Moody Center, but we also have the smaller venues like the Continental Club and Stubbs. So the question is, when we talk about these big, large scale venues bringing artists, for example, for ACL, they just listed their artists, and we have people like Kendrick Lamar coming to town, Shania Twain, the Foo Fighters. So we have these big venues with these big artists, but what can we do to ensure that the local artists and the local musicians are able to display their work, on this scale as well? And I'll start with you,
I
Chaka.
gotta say that ACL, I've been pushing, I've been very vocal about ACL's lack of diversity in their lineups. And I have to say that in terms of Austin local artists, and I have to say that this year is better than any year previous. And I think that the memo was received. I think they can always do better and always push for better, but I'm definitely seeing more representation of Austin artists of color, musicians of color on their lineup this year. And in previous years, they've gotten better at it. It still can always improve, but I want to encourage anybody out there, is like, that was me and others just like vocalizing and saying that this was not enough. What they were doing was not enough. And I feel like that influenced them to make the changes that they made. During South by Southwest, we had a project called Vision 8291, which we hired, it's over 20 bands. We paid out, almost $40,000 to artists, videographers, photographers locally, and that was about reversing the trauma of 1928 master plan in the city of Austin. So we are partnering with South by Southwest, and we want to partner with other institutions, historical Austin institutions, to invest back into communities of color. We had an almost nearly packed out, sold out show at Stubbs. Thousands of people came out on a Tuesday night to see the Tiaras and Caramello Hayes and so many different artists, Urban Heat, Black and brown artists, some of the best artists in the country, in my opinion, let alone Austin. So these type of things need to happen more often. There needs to be more partnership. And I see that there's a lot of possibility there. And I would say that like ACL has done a better job every year at addressing these issues. It's not perfect, but they're doing better.
Thank you. Annie, now we know that ACL, South by Southwest, we're talking about, country, rock and roll, pop, hip hop. But in terms of opera, can you tell us, what are some of the people you work with thinking about the venues and some of their opportunities in the city?
Well, sure. So we just did our first production at the Moody Amphitheater at Waterloo Park, which is, in terms of an audience experience, I feel like a wonderfully inclusive venue, right? If you can find your way to afford the cost of producing something there, outside venues in the heart of a city are welcoming environments. And so what we produced there was Bella Noche de Música in collaboration with the Mexican Consulate and the Opera de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. And so it was an evening of, there was some opera, but there was a lot of mariachi, there was ranchero singing. And, it was, to date, we measure kind of audience satisfaction with every kind of show that we put on. It was our highest, most enthusiastically received show we ever did. So there's great opportunities. The thing is, the price tag to be at these venues is still quite high. And so we were also, we were grateful to the Moody Foundation. They gave us a $75,000 grant so that we could make admission free to the entire community, which was also a critical piece of the puzzle. So it was quite an effort to get that all to come together and be possible. But the result was so moving and so outstanding for the community. Fortunately, also PBS is partnering with us to broadcast it across the country on PBS during Hispanic Heritage Month and Monday. So we're hoping, not on Monday, in September. So we're hoping that provides kind of a real proof of concept of what it can look like when a community is coming together and embracing shared culture and shared history. That we're able to garner more support, whether it be from foundations or the government or from for-profit venues, to make those types of arts and culture experiences possible.
Thank you. So I mentioned ACL, but of course, South by Southwest was also criticized, for the artist pay. That was some of the buzz recently. So as we talk about all the creatives in the city, I wanted to ask each of you, what can we do to change the narrative? How can we get people to understand the importance of an artist being paid for their work, their content, their creativity? It might be music, it might be a painting, it might be a song or dance. How do we shape the narrative in the right direction for the artist? And I'll start with Theresa.
Well, for me, I think starting with communities that typically haven't invested in the arts, right? Annie, thanks for bringing up, Waterloo Greenway, and, just as you were talking, made me think, the Moody family has been investing in the arts. So that's a part of corporate philanthropy that I hope family philanthropy that I think could be a really great example. That, I do want to recognize the ones who have invested in the arts. And I would say having a Moody Center, a Moody Amphitheater, and the Moody, there's a third one. So to have 3 Moody sites in our city, we're blessed to have that, right? But I also had a thought on how, over the past year of our cultural trust process, hearing the 45 applicants talk about how many times their venue has been displaced. So even the ones, to Chaka's point of, and of course, these weren't all well-known venues. A lot of them some are well-known and some are not. But we have arts organizations today officing or have been displaced and are officing or have all of their things out of a 1,500 square foot storage unit, right? Where they just are putting everything in there. Sorry, I think I got totally off topic, but that's where I went around and listening to Annie talk about Moody and just thinking about the venues that are also being displaced and the venues that we've lost. I mean, there's venues that have shut down that we'll never get back, and you'll never recreate that vibe if that space is gone, right? And I think there's several in town that are at jeopardy of that today as well.
Thank you, Theresa. Chaka, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, it's a story, it's a narrative. I mean, we have to tell it, and so if people are listening to me, they're gonna it's a broken record, and I feel like the only thing that changes something like McDonald's, a corporation like McDonald's, is people stop buying the Big Macs, they start saying they want something healthier. So we have to tell the story that you need to eat healthier, and then people need to stop buying the Big Macs, and they need to start influencing these companies to change. I heard the cries during South by Southwest, and I definitely, as someone that's participated as a musician in South by Southwest since I've been here, definitely appreciated that. But I think what we have to do is we have to show them through our actions that this is important. And so, I personally think that even by next year, we can have something better for specifically Austin musicians. Where we can figure out something with the companies here and things where the Austin musicians can get a better wage for their performances, and that can spread out to everyone that's coming. I think you got to take it incrementally, but you also have to be very forceful and clear about what's not being addressed and how they can address it. There's so many companies that come here via South by Southwest. Each one can pitch in and make sure that artists are paid better. But again, if the leadership is not really, they live in a bubble, they live in a situation where they don't understand that impact, it doesn't happen. The ACL amount that they've paid our musicians has changed since we played it. I think we played it in 2015 and we played it again in 2022, 21. Those wages, what they're paying has changed. So it's possible for South by Southwest to do the same. It's just about sitting down and figuring out where the money is and what needs to be done, and also them being influenced to realize that it's time for a change. I don't think it's really hitting them if you're on the outside. They're in a castle. You're on the outside saying this isn't fair, and we agree. But you have to figure out how to tell your story, how to bring it to them so that change is possible. And I think it really is. I believe it's possible.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have just a few more minutes left, but I had another question I wanted to chat with you guys about. We know that despite all these challenges that we've talked about today here, artists keep pushing, they keep creating, they keep coming up with new ways and ideas to show their work. So the question is for each of you, if you have something to add, great, is what are some of the new areas of creative work being shown here in Central Texas? And I'll start with you, Annie, if you have anything to add to that. Go ahead.
In response. Oh, go ahead, Sonta.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know you mentioned opera, so and you talked about having the event with Moody. So what are some other ways that some of maybe singers are trying to ensure that they still can perform in the city, other venues, for example, even churches, perhaps, just anything that
sure. Yeah, I mean, opera is such the ultimate collaborative medium. It takes so many different artists and so many different skill sets to come together to make something. And, during the pandemic is really kind of the first time the Austin Opera arose to some national recognition, because we were able to find ways to create work for artists to keep working during the pandemic in a safe way. We did an opera out at Circuit of the Americas. We staged an opera out there in Tosca outdoors with race cars going around. It was ridiculous, but it got a full slate of artists out there collaborating in a whole new way with thousands of people that were able to come see it. So whether it's on a large scale like that, or yes, as you mentioned, there's so many fantastic operatic performances going on in coffee shops and small theaters throughout Austin. The creativity is really inspiring.
Thank you. Theresa, anything you have to add?
Well, when you said new art, my children came to mind, and I want to give a thanks to AISD for prioritizing the arts. And even through the pandemic, to hear my children, my daughter plays guitar and drums, and hearing them in class doing that online, I just give thanks to those teachers who kept prioritizing the arts through the pandemic, not just the pandemic. And then my son plays percussion as well. My daughter's playing with the mariachi at University of Texas. So really, just when I think of new art, I think of this next generation and the young children, and just super thankful and so grateful that AISD has continued to provide the arts. The McCallum Fine Arts Academy, the fact that we have an academy in the city is huge. So when you said new artists, I thought of my own children who are both musicians.
It's certainly important. Okay, Chaka, we have about 20 seconds if you could have anything you'd like to add.
I mean, I'll just say DAWA. You know, we have a studio that's downtown that's free that allows people to come and create content. We have a new partnership with South by Southwest, which is centering BIPOC creatives, not just in Austin, but around the globe. We have a Black Live Music Fund that we're relaunching in June during Black Music Month at Antone's. We have a 4-week residency. We're creating opportunities and innovating in every possible way that we can and forming partnerships with everybody that's willing to form partnerships because we feel like, again, we are in a crisis and we're moving as such.
Thank you so much. Well, that concludes today's discussion of what's next for Austin's creatives. I want to thank our guests today, Theresa Alvarez, Chaka Mahone, and Annie Burridge, for all the great insights. So if you're listening at home, please make sure that you listen to what they said and try to make a difference in this community and support the creatives, whether it's a big venue or small venue, even a museum. Do your part to make sure these creatives get the recognition that they deserve. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, I'm Sonta Henderson. Thank you for watching.